The seventh inauguration ceremony since the commencement of Nigeria's Fourth Republic is due in 10 days, and President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu will take the oath of office. I'm joined now by Biodun Sowunmi for a conversation on what to expect and its significance for Nigeria. Thank you so much for coming up on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
So we're looking at the seventh consecutive inauguration ceremony since 1999, and by next year it would have been a quarter of a century of unbroken democratic rule in Nigeria. I'm wondering just how significant for you this feat is.
Oh, yes. It's quite very significant in the sense that we've always been having military interruptions, interventions in different forms, stemming from failure of civil rule or perceived failure of civil rule. And once we have those problems, the military will move in and interrupt the development of democracy in our country. But remarkably, since 1999, we've been on this journey. We've not experienced that, even though we've been having the same complaints, about civilian rule by different governments. Nigerians have been complaining because their aspirations have not been met. Particularly the dividends of democracy, many people are yet to feel it, either in terms of infrastructural development at the federal level or at the state level. In some states, yes, they are, but not in all the states. So therefore, Nigerians have reasons to complain. But
I have heard Nigerians also yearn for what they call the good old days. Would you say that even with our level of development, unbroken democratic rule is better than military interventions?
Look, the worst civilian regime is better than the best military rule. Because the first thing the military will do, the first thing they always do when they take over power in any country, including Nigeria, is to suspend the fundamental rights of the citizens. Basically, you have no rights. You have no right, either freedom of expression, forget it. Even the press got, mangled. You remember the famous Decree 2 and Decree 4, which led to the jailing of some journalists and all that. Nobody can criticize if you offer constructive criticisms, and in the eyes of the military dictatorship, they think you did it, or they're not pleased with it, you get arrested.
So the Twitter rants we have today would not be possible under the military rule?
Oh, yes, certainly. It wouldn't have been possible under the military rule. And things like, now people can go on the street and protest over one thing or the other, as long as they do not, damage properties or infringe on other people's rights, to go about their daily living, it's okay. We never had that under the military rule. So people always have their complaints bottled up, unable to express them like what we are doing currently.
But let's look at the implication for the continent. World leaders from Africa, Europe, and America are expected at this event. It will be all eyes on Nigeria. I'm wondering just how, important this historic event is for the African continent, where in the past 10 years, for instance, we've had scores of, attempted coups and coup d'etats. What does this mean for Africa?
Oh, yeah, it's quite very important for two reasons. One, the country Nigeria. Nigeria is the biggest black country, in the, populated country in the whole world. In addition to that, in Africa, 1 in 4 Africans is a Nigerian. So therefore, anything happening in Nigeria that leads to stability, it's well appreciated, because we only need to imagine if we have problems in the country and the population spill over to the borders. You can imagine the pressure that will be on UK, because virtually many people have relations in UK, America, and other parts of Europe, and given their own liberal laws on migration in certain situations, people are bound to troop in there, and that will worsen their own situation. So many people are happy that whatever the challenges we are facing, we've been able to manage them, and they are now more hopeful, which is the second point, on the choice of the candidate. Asiwaju Tinubu, no doubt, no matter what anybody says, is seen, perceived to be a symbol of democracy. He is seen as a leader that would eventually deepen democracy in Nigeria. The reason is this. He was one of those people, he was a leader of NADECO. was one of those people that fought for the restoration of democracy in Nigeria. He fought for the actualization of June 12th and the restoration of democracy in Nigeria. Basically, whoever has taken his life, stake everything to fight for democracy is bound to appreciate it and probably, most likely deepen it. And that's a huge expectation which the whole world has, currently. The second factor is Tinubu again, which is under the same Tinubu second issue. He is a well-connected Nigerian who has had interactions at different levels with different governments, particularly in Africa, and power brokers, even in Europe and America. So when you look at his connections, his links in Africa, Nigeria is bound to get more respected. Many of the leaders were quite very happy when Tinubu was declared the president. You realize that one or two leaders from neighboring African countries were actually in Abuja when the news broke out. So there's a huge expectation, from his own new incoming government. People are expecting stability. They're expecting the democracy to be deepened. They're expecting dividends of democracy. They're expecting stability in West Africa, where Nigeria is the regional power, and also Nigeria to play a major role, in continental affairs, particularly with the AFTA, which is the African Countries Free Trade Agreement, the implementation of that to drive the economic growth of Africa. So it's a lot of expectations, huge expectations, which his administration is bringing in.
And I'm sure that many Nigerians and indeed Africans will hold him, by a high standard given the precedents that you have talked about. Let's take a short break now. When we return, we'll turn our attention to the timetable, the schedule of activities lined up ahead of May 29. Stay with us. We're counting down to May 29 Inauguration Day. Biodun Sowunmi is right here with me in the studio. So the activities leading to inauguration began in earnest officially yesterday to resume on Tuesday, I believe with a regimental dinner in honor of the Commander-in-Chief. But I'm interested by what will happen on May 25. Of course, that's when both the President-elect and the Vice President-elect will be honored with GCFR and GCON, but also that's when we expect to see the transition document officially handed over to him. Recall that the Buhari administration complained about the delay in handover notes in 2015. I think it was Garba Shehu who did mention that the transition committee then did not really cooperate. What's the implication of harmonious transition process for the incoming administration?
Yes. It's we must acknowledge one thing. No matter what anybody thinks about the Buhari administration, the transition process is almost seamless. It's almost flawless.
Well,
I mean,
it's expected for the same party. I mean, I would be surprised if...
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. If you look at, we've had situations, okay, I can give you a good example. When Fayemi lost election after his first term in Ekiti, he cooperated with Fayose that got in. They had a seamless handover. We had the same thing, when Obasanjo left power. So that's something that was not as good as what we have now. What we have now is a full, comprehensive, transition program in a way that the handover, both parties have exchanged notes. In fact, to some extent, even people representing the president-elect they have input into some of the decisions which are being implemented, so that to be able to ensure continuity. Even Mr. President Buhari graciously mandated top government officials to make sure that they carry the president-elect along in decisions, in new decisions before the handover date. So, and that would ensure continuity, which is something good. It also affords an opportunity for the president-elect to understand the state of the economy, rather than getting into office and now trying to get his head around it. So he's beginning thinking about what to do, which we're expecting some important landmark, speeches, in his inaugural address. For instance, we're expecting him to set out his vision of Nigeria, what Nigeria will be under his own administration. We're expecting him to set out his goals. What does he intend to achieve during his own tenure? So all these important issues will come out. They will be a product of his understanding the state of the economy as it is today. So it's quite very important.
This handover document is expected to detail what the outgoing government is doing, current projects, upcoming deadlines, and things like that. Do you anticipate a seamless continuity in government programs and projects post-inauguration?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that would have to be continued, and some may have to be reviewed. Okay, I can give a very good example. The card swap policy has not been cancelled. It's still in existence, but nobody has seen the new Naira note. So one of the things which the new administration would have to think about is they would have to carry out a review and decide whether they want to stick with the old Naira notes, or they want to continue with the catch swap program, a modified version of it. So we don't know what the president will decide, but the new president will decide. But that is an issue certainly that will have to be reviewed, whether we like it or not. Another important issue is industrial relations. If you look at the Buhari's administration, the administration was weak in his achievement in managing industrial relations. And we could see several series of strikes lasting so many months.
The resident doctors are even
on strike now, crippling the health sector. So one of the things which I think the new president will do is to review the industrial relations system and then try and see how it could ensure.
Some are anticipating that will be tough for him, given, the what we say with the Labour Party and its affiliation with
yes. The Labour Party, I understand that. The NLC leadership, the NLC is a trustee of Labour Party.
Yeah.
So already that through.
And they have taken an obvious side in that regard.
They've taken a public stance, and that makes them to be partisan. But notwithstanding that, the welfare of workers is what will reign supreme. And I'm looking at a situation where Asiwaju Tinubu will try and do what he did in Lagos. In Lagos, lecturers don't go on strike. We have industrial peace. Hardly will you hear of any sector going on strike. We're expecting him to do a similar thing. It will be tough. It won't be easy, particularly given the partisan nature of the leadership of NLC currently. It will be tough. But he's a man we know that likes taking challenge. He will take on it, and we expect him to take on it, and then come out, with an arrangement, whether it's through collective bargaining system or we're going to have a national bargaining, in a way that workers will continue to do their job, and government will also implement agreements reached with the trade unions.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the legislation backing up the transition process. So the president, through Executive Order 14 in January, approved the establishment of the Presidential Transition Council. But yesterday we had the Secretary of the Government of the Federation calling for specific legislation on presidential transition in Nigeria as it's obtainable in, the leading democracies of the world. Are you surprised that 24 years after, we still do not have this document signed?
Well, what the Secretary to the Government of Federation is trying to do is it's exactly what the executive order is doing. You can do it either by enacting a law, the National Assembly can enact a law, detailing all the processes, or you can have it through a presidential proclamation like Buhari did. But probably what he's up to is to ensure that this is institutionalized. It should not depend on whether a president is willing to do it or not. That is the point in the SGF calling for an act, to establish that process, the transitional council process. But notwithstanding that, the fact of the matter is the Buhari got it right this time around. He did set it up. He did issue an executive order to that effect. But I understand the point the SGF is making, so that the future government will be compelled to do the same thing.
Absolutely. Pre-election, there were a lot of review of our Electoral Act, and that's one legacy for the outgoing president, what he did with the electoral law. But not many people talked about the duration it should take. I mean, the election petitions should take prior to inauguration. Are you surprised that is coming up now? Because we've always had presidents since 1999, go to court even after being sworn in. Is that something that you think should be reviewed, in the coming years?
No, I don't think so. I think Buhari got that right. The reason is this. What we used to have in the past is that a case against a governor or the president will go on for like 2 years, while the person being challenged, the respondent, is enjoying...
Now, there's a limited time. For the presidential tribunal, I think it's just 180 days.
180 days, 6 months. So what they've done is to cut it down in a way that you will not be able to stay in that office.
Some are saying we can have it for a shorter period of time before swearing in.
It's almost impossible. They do not understand the processes. Look, when a plaintiff files an action, the respondents will have to reply, and new issues will come up, and they have time limits within which to respond to that. Then you can also have a counter motion. You can have a counter affidavit, you can have a counter case, and you can have multiple cases, from different parties like we have in this one, where you have about 3, 4, 5 parties, challenging. So how are you going to muzzle the whole thing together? The defense must have the time to respond as stated in law. So any attempt to cut it short will not work. Currently, it is even difficult to prove any case in presidential elections. The reason is this. The issue is about substantial compliance. To prove substantial compliance, you need at least to be able to prove that in 25 to 30% of cases, there are issues, there are infractions of the electoral law. That is almost difficult. What is being taken to court currently is just about 10%.
We're going to leave the court to decide that in the coming days. I understand that,
but when you look at reducing the time further, that will make it again more difficult to prove.
I get your point.
Any case in any election petitions tribunal. So Buhari has done so much. Yes, we can still tinker with the electoral rules, but not about abridging
the duration of time.
Yeah.
Well, that's our time. Just like we can't cut this show any shorter for it to make sense. Biodun Sowunmi, Public Affairs Analyst, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.